Welcome everyone to our episode 59 of our podcast Cultivating a New Generation. In today's episode of the section Drops of Wisdom, we are going to talk about the book Salt, Sugar and Fat by Michael Moss, and we are going to discuss around the question, why are you so hungry all the time? Is it normal? No, it's not normal. Is it common? Yes, it's very common. And why it's happening? We are going to discuss everything about the ingredients that many of these food industry tricks, what do they do? What are the ingredients? What are the effects that they cause in your health, that they cause in your brain, that they cause in your metabolism, and why you become addicted to certain kind of foods, to certain kind of products, and why you are anxious or hungry all the time. All of those things we're going to discuss, and what can you do, of course, to stop these cycles of toxicity in terms of the food that you are consuming and in terms of the combinations that you can detect now in your shopping list. So, without further ado, let's go with the topic. Processed food has high levels of sugars, and they disguise the saturated fats and the trans fats, which are the perfect combo or combination to create a highly palatable food that will keep you hooked in toxic loops of constant hunger. Additionally, the so-called healthy or light options, those are the worst, by the way, they have artificial sweeteners and they cause the same effect or even worse. Why? Because you are trying to cheat on your brain, but you are not cheating anyone. You are just activating indirect mechanisms to give you these side effects, such as having an hypoglycemic shock, which comes when you are consuming these artificial sweeteners, and then you feel that you are having a low glucose level and you feel anxious and you feel hungry and you keep consuming more the whole day, and you are just also distracted, you are not able to focus, and in more or less 1, 2, or 3 hours you will have a crash of energy because of these artificial sweeteners or the excess of sugar. Read what you consume, and soon you'll end those toxic loops of hunger cycles. So what happened in the history of all of this processed food development? In the post-World War II changes, we had processed convenient foods introduced in the market because the traditional home-cooked meal, as women began taking jobs, couldn't happen anymore. So that led to less time for cooking and more time to buy these kind of things, these kind of processed food. General Foods introduced first the yellow instant pudding, marking one of the first successful processed convenience foods. So that marked the market with those kind of foods, but also many of the cereals from Kellogg's and other companies, they also introduced this kind of addiction and disguise of the sugar with the combination of fat. So, what is the power of salt, sugar, and fat? Processed food relies on the immense powers of salt, sugar, and fat. These three ingredients are key to become addicted and enhance the flavor and appeal of any kind of food. Americans consume excessive amounts of sugar, and not only Americans, now is everywhere almost in the world, except for the countries that are more conscious in terms of consuming more food that comes from the earth, which mainly they are the east side, often unknowingly through processed foods, leading to health concerns like obesity and diabetes. So, the more you consume these excessive amounts of processed foods, the more you are um, activating the metabolic pathways that will lead you to develop a chronic disease. That is, if you do it very often. So, what is the impact of fat, let's say, in processed food? Fat in processed foods has multiple benefits. One is the improved shelf life and texture and the appearance of the food. Many of these consumers of processed food exceed the recommended intake of fat, which is linked to health issues such as heart disease and diabetes. So the more you are consuming these kind of trans fats or excess of saturated fat, the more you are leading yourself to develop heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and the metabolic syndrome in general. The role of salt in processed foods. What is the role of salt? Processed foods contribute significantly to the average of the, let's say, the people that consume salt intake. Excessive sodium intake from processed food can lead to high blood pressure and hypertension. That's why we see younger people every day now with these episodes of high blood pressure, or even worse, now with hypertension, even children. That's ridiculous that children can have hypertension and they have this episode of high blood pressure. Why? Because they are consuming so much processed foods. Processed foods which contribute more than 3/4 of the people that consume processed food sodium intake. So 2/3 of the sodium that you are consuming comes from these kind of processed foods. Salt brings out the flavor of food and also hides unpleasant tastes of that often remain in a processed food after manufacturing. The so-called off notes, or those flavors that many people don't enjoy, they are covered by the excess of salt or fat. So they are found that, for example, the author tasted the Campbell's vegetable beef soup before salt was added and found that it had a bitter metallic flavor. So what did the industry do? Add a lot of sodium, and that's the trick, so that the soup tastes better. So what is the role of government and what is the consumer responsibility in all of this dilemma of the artificial sweeteners, sugars, fat, and salt? Government interventions such as labeling, high salt content, and public health campaigns should be encouraged. We are lucky, the ones that live in Mexico, because we have an agency that dedicates just specifically to label this kind of food. And now we have these very visible stamps that say excess of sugars, excess of salt, excess of calories, and we can recognize, or people can recognize, what are they consuming. So that should be spread all over the world, so that people that are lazy and they don't read the labels, they can just identify by these stamps that this kind of food is not good for your health. Consumers play a crucial role in pressuring these authorities and driving change by making healthier choices and not consuming these kind of products. influencing food companies to produce healthier options and real options. So, how can I summarize all of this information and how can we avoid doing that? Well, the investment of your time in reading the labels, the recognizing of names, which now you can just Google the name. In 2 minutes, you will have the answer of what kind of chemical is that and what is the purpose of the chemical, and even the side effects. So, and it is not becoming obsessive in terms of looking everything, but it is becoming an expert in your own health and becoming an expert in the kind of ingredients that are not good for your health and that will cause a deleterious effect in your overall well-being. So, to summarize all this information, I can say that keeping your your foods has to be how can I say it? In average, every person that has an unconscious diet consumes more or less 22 tablespoons or 88 grams of sugar per person per day. More than 2/3 come from these processed foods. So that's the first phrase or paragraph that I can use to summarize this information. And the second one is fat has other benefits for the industry. As I mentioned before, it gives more shelf life to the food that we consume, and from cookies until the hot dogs, or so far to the hot dogs, it gives a lot of products a better texture and a more appeal in terms of the vision that you have. So these factors also increase the quantity of fat that is being utilized in this processed food. So in general, what can you do? Report these kind of products, because in terms of ethical concerns, you should be able to report this kind of food, and the more you consume them, the more you are telling the industry that you are okay with these kind of chemicals. So what can you do? Consume the real food, consume market food, consume food that is real, organic, and just look at the label, because many of these options are just being labeled organic and they are not, or they have these artificial sweeteners. So just take care of that and be an expert in your own health. Thank you very much for paying attention. And just as a side note, I like to invite you next week, or more or less in 1 week and a half, I will release a new podcast that it will be the, let's say, the chapter 2 of this podcast, Cultivating a New Generation, that will be under my name and will be more specific, with a little bit shorter episodes, but more focus, and we will have a lot of surprises in terms of the guest and discussions that we are going to have in this new format. So stay tuned, ask questions, and please, just one more thing, spread the information that is around these topics, so that many people becomes more conscious in terms of the food that they consume. Thank you. Have a wonderful Wednesday and middle of the week, and see you next Wednesday. Bye.